In this month's Science Jam, we'll be talking to Vedang Joshi. So, Vedang and I know each other since a pretty long time because we used to go to the same school. And he was one of those kids who was the smartest in the batch, but also not the kind of person who wouldn't participate in other things. He was the kind of guy who would give his best in both arenas. And when I reconnected with him during lockdown, and I got to know what he's pursuing as his major in completing his bachelor's degree, I was quite impressed because so his topic is mathematical biology, which is quite rare. If you'd ask an Indian student who's pursuing their bachelor in India, they'd definitely agree with me when I say that it's quite rare for someone to major in such a specific topic, although it is interdisciplinary. So yeah, so about Vedang is pursuing his bachelor's degree from University of Bristol in applied mathematics, and he hopes to pursue his PhD in again applied mathematics, but more into mathematical biology. So we'd be, I mean, we'd be enjoying a little chat with him today, and we'd get to know what his work entails, and a little bit more about mathematical biology. So, Lumina, you can start.
Okay, so my first question to you is why mathematical biology? Because here in India, it's either maths or it's biology. So even when we have to choose streams, we either choose engineering or medicine, which is where engineering is considered mostly a mathematical field and medicine is a biological field. So maths and bio are treated as two different blocks here. So why did you take up mathematical biology? What's the epiphany moment for you there?
So I think I'd always been interested in maths, and before I kind of realized that you can view maths as something that's not really abstract or esoteric, but you can actually look at, the outside world. You can look at nature and you can find patterns, and then you can link that into mathematics. And before I realized that, I was actually going down the same route as people in India normally do. I was actually hoping to either study maths at university or engineering, so mechanical engineering or something along those lines. But then I actually did a project at school here in the UK, and it was on the patterns that you see in nature. It's essentially a research project that you had to do, write 5,000 words, do loads of literature review and, stuff that you do usually at master's or, master's level anywhere across the globe. And it was really a good program to try and, get students into the academic world. And so I did mine on patterns in nature. And what I found was just extraordinary, really, because I'll give you a few examples what I actually found out, and you can tell me if it's bizarre, weird, is it a coincidence? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure even today. So there's such things. There's sequence in maths. It's called a Fibonacci sequence. So the sequence, it's quite pertinent in the sense you can start off with the number 1, or you can start with 0. It doesn't matter. You can start with 0, 1, and then each number after that is the sum of the previous two numbers. So it's 0, 1, 1, 3, 5, 8, and it goes on until infinity. And the crazy thing is, if you take any two numbers in the Fibonacci sequence, any two consecutive numbers in the Fibonacci sequence, if you divide the bigger number by the smaller number, you get closer and closer to a number which is called the golden ratio in mathematics. It's approximately 1.619. It's an irrational number. I think you can represent it as 1 plus root 5 all over 2. And you see this number, you see this constant everywhere in the natural world. So you can take, say, okay, so if you take a pineapple, you know, pineapple's got different scales, right? So there's scales in pineapples that go one way. Some of them go anti-clockwise, some go clockwise. People have seen that the spirals going clockwise, there's 13 rows of spirals going clockwise, 8 going the other way. So if you divide 13 by 8, you get closer and closer to 1.619.
Wow.
You can look at so if you look at the middle of the sunflower, there's 33 spirals going one way I think they're going clockwise. There's 24 going the other way around. Divide 33 by 24, you get 1.619.
Wow.
If you divide, so if you take your hand, if you take your entire hand, the length of this, if you take the length from your shoulder to your finger, you divide it between, divide it for the length between your elbow to the tip of your fingers, it's 1.619.
Wow.
If you take it, if you take your leg, if you take the entire leg from your waist to your toes, divide that between your knees to your legs, that's 1.619. which is bizarre. It's bizarre. I'm fairly sure, I think Leonardo da Vinci came up with that. And it's bizarre, right? Is it a coincidence? Maybe, maybe not.
Crazy.
But it exists. So that was one thing I found, which just struck me out of the blue. There was another thing. I don't know if you guys have heard of Turing patterns. So if you look at the stripes on zebras, or if you look at stripes on cheetahs, those stripes or those spots, you can actually model those using different partial differential equations. So these are equations that aren't exactly normal equations. They're a bit weird in the sense there's two variables or maybe more variables that there are parameters that go into solving that equation. They're not exactly linear, they're not quite non-linear, they're somewhere in the middle. It's a bit bizarre. So you can use long equations with multiple parameters, and you can actually see those spots. So if you've got a blank surface, you can use those equations to actually simulate the patterns on cheetahs, on zebras, and it's called Turing morphogenesis. So this
is new.
You can actually model. You can model, the stripes or the patterns on seashells of snails or other aquatic mammals.
Wow.
You can actually create equations to simulate those spirals. So if you can actually use mathematical tools to simulate that, and there's actually, there's studies by Sabelli in the 1950s that actually showed the actual simulation, the picture of the simulation, and the actual shell that they were trying to simulate from, and it's uncanny. I try and get the photos up for you, but unfortunately I can't. It's uncanny when you see the resemblance. And that's what kind of got me interested in mathematical biology, that you can actually use mathematical tools and frameworks to understand the world around us. And that's just incredible for me.
Totally, that is really incredible.
Agreed. I mean, the coincidences, it's crazy. I mean, it's also related.
It is.
If I'm not wrong, the part about the golden ratio and the measurement and the ratio thing in the Da Vinci Code.
Yep, you might have, yes.
So I was really amazed at at all those numbers,
But it's actually true, and there have been studies that people have conducted throughout the ages, and nobody's been able to disprove it. But nobody can't explain why it happens either. We're at an impasse there.
Crazy.
So that was my epiphany moment, I think you can say, maybe a couple of years ago. And since then, I've tried to expand my knowledge, tried to work with people who are who love the same stuff that I do, And you know,
Right.
it's been hard at times, but it's doable. It's absolutely possible. You just
Yeah.
have to be, you know, you just have to want it enough.
True.
So, what
That
does
makes
your
sense.
course comprise of? Because mathematical biology, I think it would require a whole panel of experts to actually decide what they want to teach their students and how interesting should the course be. Like mathematical biology, what exactly do they teach you there?
So my course is actually applied mathematics, and they teach us, you know, the basics of mathematics. So the first 2 years, it's basics of mathematics for engineers, for mathematicians, for physicists. It's pretty much the same course that they'll teach you across the globe. The fun begins in the third year, where you get to have electives. So the electives that I'm actually doing this year are modern mathematical biology, where they teach us more about, you know, the partial differential equations that I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
you know, with the Turing morphogenesis.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what they try and teach us to solve either analytically or using computers, so numerical methods and stuff like that. So there's a range of numerical methods that I won't bore you with really. But it's doable on
Yeah.
computers. It's doable using algorithms and programs that you write. So another part of, you know, my course, a lot of it hinges on you being able to manipulate data. So if you want to
Okay.
manipulate big data, you need to be able to program. And as far as I know, there's so many good courses in India that teach you to be able to program efficiently. So anybody wanting to go into mathematical biology, you need to have a decent background in computer programming, but that shouldn't be an issue really for people in India, I don't think. So programming does comprise of, you know, it is a main facet of our course, mathematics, obviously, and other electives. Like I'm taking a computational biology unit, computational neuroscience unit, and they teach us. So the first few lectures that I've had this year are essentially doing the biology of a neuron. So they they teach us what a neuron looks like. You know, you've got the dendrites, you've got the axon, you've got, you know, the cell body, the soma, and then it then goes into how the neuron is essentially a wire that you can use to send signals through. And then it's more of the computational side of neurons that they want us to, you know, become familiar with, because that's more pertinent to computational neuroscience than actually knowing what the biology of the neuron is, or biology of the cell is, essentially.
Right.
So that forms a big part of our course. And there's a fair bit of statistics involved as well, because as mathematicians, as data scientists, we need to be able to analyze big data, and the best way or the most efficient way to do it is through statistics. So different hypothesis tests, different you know, student tests, or, you know, different distributions that you need to know of to be able to group data, to be able to analyze data. So that's pretty much what our course is.
So it's a 4-year
The
course
framework
or a
is
5-year
interesting
course?
though.
Sorry?
Is it a 4-year or a 5-year course?
So it's a 4-year course, but it's an integrated master's course. So I get a master's degree by the end of the 4th year. If you want to do just the bachelor's, it's a 3-year course.
Okay, so essentially your master's is
And
for 1
pretty
year.
much all the courses here in the UK. Yep. And the bachelor's is for 3 years normally. And you don't actually have to have a master's to get onto the PhD program, but it just gives you a lot more background. It gives you a bit more, you know, stuff to work with, really.
Right.
And you get an extra year to figure out what you want to do.
True.
That makes
Most important
sense.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Honestly,
Vedang,
get to know the subject better.
true. So Vedang, could you enlighten us about the work that you're doing currently? As in, how does this field of mathematics and biology intersect in the work that you're doing right now?
So during the summer of 2020, I started work at Imperial College London, which was affiliated to the University of London a few years earlier, but is now a different institution. And they've got an incredibly good biomathematics program. where you have people working on different facets of biomathematics. And the work that I was involved with was related to complex networks. So it's trying to create a framework, a network, a large network for different protein interactions that happen throughout the human body. So just to give the viewers a bit of background about, the biology behind it, as far as I know, and do correct me if I do get the biology wrong, because it's not my forte, but as far as I know, so if you consider a cell, it's got different organelles within the cell, and one of them, a quite important one, is the mitochondria, which everyone kind of knows is essentially the powerhouse of the cell. Bit cliche, but it is true.
Yeah.
And so the mitochondria, it's weird because it has its own DNA, and they actually, it's different from other organelles in the cell body, in that they can actually create their own proteins. So they manufacture proteins along with the RNA, and they then export them outside the cell body. And if it's outside the cell body, it's called that gene or that protein is being expressed. It's expressed outside the cell body. And all the cells in the human body do that. So you can then classify all the proteins in the human body as either mitochondrially expressed, or non-mitochondrially expressed. And what we think is, and all these proteins then interact with each other throughout the human body. And we wanted to find, if you create a network of all these interactions, are the mitochondrially expressed proteins more central to that network than non-mitochondrial proteins? So what does it mean essentially when I say, is a protein central? It's a mathematical idea which says, if a particular protein interacts with a lot of other proteins, then it is more central to that network than other proteins which may not be interacting with other proteins in the human body. So what we thought was, if it's a mitochondrial protein, it's more central to this entire network, and then in turn is more essential for human survival. And if that does turn out to be true, it could have implications for how drug delivery systems are then created by pharmaceutical companies. And then if there's actually mitochondrial diseases, so mitochondrial expressed diseases, you can actually target these certain proteins and it'll be more efficient, it'll be more effective. And that's the general idea. We didn't go that far, but that's the kind of thoughts we are having. Like you could go kind of that way, really.
Right.
So that's what we did. And the results were staggering, in the sense that we did kind of find that mitochondrial proteins do have a tendency of being more central. Now, this work we are actually planning on publishing. So
Oh, wow.
don't take it. So yeah.
Yeah.
So that was my work at Imperial, and I loved every minute of it. And so my role in the whole project was more the implementation. So how do you take all this data and then try and create a framework or a pipeline to understand, or to understand it essentially, or predict behaviors from it. And that was my role essentially throughout the whole thing.
That's really interesting.
Right.
Impressive.